Surrender? The Sword Sect would naturally not surrender. Even though it had fallen to decline and suffered such huge setback that weakened its strength, it was absolutely impossible to make them become the servants of those three sects and obey their orders. Disciples of the Sword Sect, heed my command. Activate the sect guarding grand formation, Su Muzha shouted. The countless disciples in the surroundings instantly returned to their senses. They stopped hesitating and poured their profound energy into the grand formation. As their profound energy surged ceaselessly into it, the enormous golden barrier of light in the sky above the Sword Sect instantly lit up, and then countless strands of golden glows of the sword shot violently towards the disciples of the three sects. Yuan Tian grunted coldly and waved his right hand. Countless strands of white light shot forward and instantly blasted apart almost half of the rays of light that came from the grand formation. On the side, Ghost King and Yu Linglong hurriedly acted as well, and those countless strands of golden light were instantly dispersed into nothingness before their joint forces. Attack! Along with Yuan Tian's order, the disciples of the Origin School who stood behind him had instantly flashed towards Sky Peak, and the profounders of the Ghost Sect and Flower Palace followed closely behind as well. The war erupted. The war between the four sects had undoubtedly shocked the entire Southern Territory. The four great sects were deeply involved with the mortal world, and they had many vassals amongst the clans in the mortal world. So, when a war occurred between the sects, these clans would definitely act as well. In next to no time, numerous clans within the Grand Qin Empire started to fight both openly and in secret, and incidents where a clan vanished overnight or was annihilated had occurred continuously throughout the empire. Surprisingly, the Grand Qin Empire actually acted indifferent towards all of this, and it allowed these clans to kill each other. Before long, chaos started to appear within the empire. The Grand Myriad Mountains. Yang Ye's brows were knit tightly without being able to ease up once. He received the information about the Southern Territory from Zhang Lu. While the three sects had besieged the Sword Sect, he was naturally not worried of the Sword Sect, and he even wished for nothing more than to see the Sword Sect obliterated. However, Su Qingshi was still in the Sword Sect, so he had no choice but to feel worried and anxious, and it was even to the extent that the thought to return immediately had crossed his mind. However, it wasn't the time to return yet, as it would be pointless to return to the Southern Territory right now, because he still hadn't accomplished one last thing. Moreover, according to the information that Zhang Lu sent to him, while the Sword Sect was being besieged by the three sects, the Sword Sect had relied on its sect guarding grand formation to prevent the coalition of the three sects from subduing them. So, a stalemate had been formed, and this allowed Yang Yi to heave a slight sigh of relief. However, Yang Yi was extremely puzzled and bewildered right now. In the beginning, when he found out that the founding emperor had summoned the elite troops of the 9 states back to the capital, he'd thought that the founding emperor had done so to control the situation. After all, it was common knowledge that the vassals of many sects resided within the Grand Qin Empire. But now it seemed like the founding emperor hadn't gathered his forces for this, and if it wasn't for that, then why did the founding emperor summon all the elite troops back to the capital? Could it be that he intends to act against the 6 great sects? That's possible indeed. After all, while the Grand Qin Empire is an overlord in the Southern Territory that controls 9 states, countless cities, and can command the world, but the 6 great sects stand above the law and aren't within the scope of the Grand Qin Empire's control. Moreover, they seize resources, especially talented individuals, from the empire every single year. Especially the Origin School, even the Grand Qin Empire is extremely fearful of it. So, doesn't the war between the 4 sects just happen to give the Grand Qin Empire a chance? But the 3 sects should be aware of this, then why did they still act against the Sword Sect when they understood such a principle? What exactly do the Grand Qin Empire and all those sects intend to do? Yang Yi thought for a long time yet was still unable to figure it out, so he just stopped thinking about it. Presently, the important matter at hand was to see the Beast Emperor, and then rush back to the Southern Territory. After all, 2 loved ones of his were still at the Southern Territory right now and were waiting for him to rescue them. Immediately return to the Southern Territory and pay close attention to all the various powers. Use a transmission talisman to convey any important or urgent information. Yang Yi pondered for a moment, and then he seemed to have thought of something. Right. Bring those fellows here to see me. Right when he entered the Grand Myriad Mountains, He'd received a transmission talisman from Xianxia, and she said that a group of assassins had arrived at the Grand Myriad Mountain to obey his orders at any time. Yang Yi was rather surprised by this. He hadn't expected that Xianxia would have actually fostered a group of assassins in such a short period, and besides feeling surprised, he felt even more anticipation. After all, those who were capable of traversing the boundless Grand Myriad Mountains to arrive here shouldn't be weaklings. In next to no time, Zhang Lu led around 100-plus profounders over to Yang Yi and Nanjing. Nanjing glanced at them before she shook her head, and then she walked off to the side before starting to meditate, because in her opinion they were truly too weak. However, Xianxia's eyes had lit up instead because there were over 30-plus spirit realm profounders amongst them, and all the rest were at the 7th rank to the 9th rank of the king realm. Even though most of the spirit realm profounders were at the 1st rank and the strongest was at the 2nd rank, it was already very good in Xianxia's opinion. After all, the time Xianxia had was too short, so it was really very good that she was able to foster so many spirit realm and king realm profounders. While Yang Yi sized them up, they were sizing him up as well. They were very curious and filled with anticipation towards this rumored pavilion master. However, they were disappointed when they saw Yang Yi, because Yang Yi was only at the 2nd rank of the spirit realm, and there were a few profounders amongst them who possessed such strength. "Which one of you is the leader?" asked Yang Yi. All of them looked at a man who stood at the front. He was around 20-plus in age, and he was one of the few at the 2nd rank of the spirit realm amongst them. The man met Yang Ye's gaze. His gaze had no respect, and there was even a trace of disdain in the depths of his eyes as he said, "It was Big Sister Anu, but she encountered something and had to come here later. So it's me now." When he spoke up to hear, the man instantly said, "You're our pavilion master?" Zhang Lu's face turned cold when he heard the man's tone. However, he didn't attack because this group of people seemed to be related to the swordmaster. So he naturally didn't dare attack without the swordmaster's orders. Yang Yi frowned, and then he glanced at them and said, "All of you seem to have a problem with me?" Zhang Lu's eyelids twitched. He'd been by Yang Ye's side for some time now, so he was quite familiar with Yang Ye's temper. Even though Yang Yi seemed to be calm and friendly on the surface, he knew that Yang Yi was furious. "We dare not." The man in the lead spoke indifferently. "I'm just slightly curious about Pavilion Master's strength." Zhang Shi would like to experience Pavilion Master's strength. He felt extreme admiration towards Xianxia because she didn't just possess strength. She even had ability and wisdom. So, no one in the entire Assassin's Pavilion would have any objections if they were to acknowledge Xianxia as the Pavilion Master. Yet now, they had to suddenly acknowledge someone they'd never met before as the Pavilion Master and listen to that person's commands. It wasn't just him. All the others behind him were discontent as well. It would be fine if their Pavilion Master was at the Exalt Realm or even the peak of the Spirit Realm, but it was actually a 2nd-rank Spirit Realm profounder. How could prideful existences like them be willing to submit before such a Pavilion Master? Yang Yi shook his head and said, "In the beginning, I was rather happy when I saw all of you. After all, your strengths are really not bad, but I'm very disappointed right now." He was truly disappointed because while their strengths weren't bad, Xianxia had clearly not taught them well. "We're quite disappointed in Pavilion Master as well." Zhang Shi spoke coldly without any fear. In the Assassin's Pavilion, his strength was shocking, and his natural talent was merely inferior to Anu. Moreover, at least 30% of the members of the Assassin's Pavilion obeyed his command. So, he expected that even if he offended this so-called Pavilion Master, Xianxia wouldn't punish him and would even try to rope him in. Yang Yi glanced at Zhang Shi before he said, "Ask Anu to see me right now. She doesn't have to come if she isn't here in 15 minutes. It was Anu who was leading the group this time, so he wanted to have a look at her attitude. If she were the same as this fellow, then all of them could just die. At that time, he'd given Xianxia everything he'd accumulated in order to foster these fellows. Now, while they had been fostered into assassins, many of them were ungrateful bastards. So he was naturally extremely displeased. Zhang Shi laughed with ridicule, and he was just about to ridicule Yang Yi. Meanwhile, a figure flashed out from the distant forest, and it was extremely swift. It arrived in front of Yang Yi in less than a few breaths of time. Anu greets the pavilion master. Anu bowed respectfully to Yang Yi. She would naturally not act so ignorantly as Zhang Shi and the others had acted when facing Yang Yi. Even though she had no knowledge of Yang Ye's exact strength, she usually heard a word or two about him from Xianxia, so she knew that he definitely possessed extraordinary strength. But his cultivation is really quite low. You're their leader? Yang Yi spoke indifferently. Yes. Yang Yi nodded, and then he told her about the attitudes Zhang Shi and the others had towards him just now. As they watched Yang Yi speak about them to Anu while standing right in front of them, Zhang Shi and some of the others behind him smiled coldly, while their disdain towards Yang Yi grew deeper. So, how do you think they should be dealt with? Yang Yi gazed at the woman with an amused expression. The woman wasn't beautiful, but she was at the third rank of the spirit realm, and she was the strongest in terms of cultivation amongst them. So, Yang Yi intended to have a look at her attitude towards the matter. Anu's expression was slightly unsightly as she turned around to glance fiercely at Zhang Shi, but she felt quite helpless in her heart. Zhang Shi's strength and cultivation were only slightly inferior to her. Coupled with the fact that he was an independent assassin recruited by Xianxia and had many followers in the assassin's pavilion, so she was really helpless against him. Unless Xianxia gave the order to kill him. Anu pondered deeply for a moment before he said, Pavilion Master, Zhang Shi and the others deserve death for offending you. However, it was their first mistake and they hadn't committed it intentionally. Moreover, the pavilion sorely lacks experts. So I hope Pavilion Master can allow Zhang Shi to atone for his mistake with meritorious service. May I know what Pavilion Master thinks? Zhang Shi instantly laughed coldly when he heard Anu. He knew that she would dare to do anything to him. However, he didn't speak out and provoke Yang Yi again. After all, he still had to give Anu face. So, he just glanced coldly at Yang Yi while disdain suffused the corners of his mouth. No! Yang Yi shook his head and said, I'll give all of you a chance. Those that are willing to follow me, stand over here. Those who are unwilling can just stand on the spot. Since Xianxia hadn't taught them well, he intended to do it himself. Anu's expression changed. She was just about to speak, yet Yang Yi had suddenly glared at her. Anu was instantly horrified. For some unknown reason, coldness had instantly arisen in her heart from Yang Yi's glare, and it was like she'd suffer annihilation if she were to open her mouth. Anu didn't dare say a word. She merely hesitated for a moment before she stood resolutely by Yang Yi's side. When they saw Anu stand by Yang Yi's side, some of the others here hesitated for a moment before they came over as well. The reason many of them had stood by Yang Yi's side was merely because of Anu. After all, she had her own group in the Assassin's Pavilion. In next to no time, almost 100 of the 150-plus profounders here were by Yang Yi's side, and the 50-plus who remained were standing behind Zhang Shi. Obviously, they intended to follow Zhang Shi's lead. Zhang Shi's expression was extremely unsightly. He'd thought that this so-called pavilion master would have used to opportunity Anu created to get out of the situation, but he hadn't imagined that the pavilion master would actually act in this way. It was clearly done against him. However, did he have any need to feel fearful? There's no place for me here, but there's naturally somewhere else. Zhang Shi spoke coldly. But it wouldn't be so easy to make me, Zhang Shi, return at that time. Don't blame me for not warning you. As he spoke, Zhang Shi intended to lead the others behind him and leave. However, Zhang Lu suddenly obstructed his path. Zhang Shi laughed coldly, and he turned around to look at Yang Yi as he said, What? Could it be that Pavilion Master intends to kill us? Blades are unable to discern between friend or foe. Don't blame me, Zhang Shi, for not warning you if you suffer any mishaps later. Are you threatening me? Yang Yi was slightly amused. I definitely have to punish that seductress. She actually recruited such an idiot as well. Does she have a screw loose? Threatening you? Zhang Shi grunted coldly and said, I dare now. I'm just reminding you not to bring ruin to yourself. In any case, they'd shed all pretenses, so he felt that he might as well go all the way. He didn't believe that this so-called pavilion master would dare attack him. Yang Yi glanced at the 50-plus profounders behind Xianxia and said, I gave all of you a chance. Unfortunately, you didn't cherish it. Kill them. Xianxia's expression changed when he heard Yang Yi because he hadn't expected that Yang Yi would actually dare attack. After all, he had over 10 spirit realm assassins on his side. On the other hand, the expressions on the faces of Anu and the others had changed slightly. They hadn't imagined that this pavilion master in front of them would actually intend to annihilate Xianxia's group. The members of both sides were stunned. No one knew if Anu and the others were acting intentionally or they were really stunned, but they hadn't chosen to attack when they heard Yang Ye's order. On the other hand, a wisp of a savage expression instantly appeared on Xianxia's face when he recovered from his shock, and then his figure flashed and instantly arrived before Yang Yi. At the same time, a dagger emanated a cold glow as it swept towards Yang Ye's chest. Capture the leader to defeat the army. Xianxia was extremely swift and had even seized the initiative, so he'd arrived in front of Yang Yi when Anu and the others recovered from their shock, and they weren't able to stop him in time even if they wanted to. A wisp of a cruel smile immediately suffused the corners of Xianxia's mouth as he gazed at Yang Yi, who stood on the spot without moving at all. What a fucking useless pavilion master. He has probably been stunned by my speed right now. Huh? Such a piece of trash is trying to be the pavilion master? I really wonder what got into Xianxia's head. Right when Xianxia's dagger was about to come into contact with Yang Ye's chest, a strand of violet light had flashed, and then the smile on the corners of his mouth had frozen. The dagger had stopped in midair while his eyes had opened wide, and there was no complacency in his eyes but only disbelief and shock, because a sword had suddenly pierced his chest, and it was Yang Ye's hand on its hilt. Right at this moment, over 30 black-clothed figures suddenly appeared here while countless rays of cold light flashed. All the 50-plus profounders who were following Xianxia had fallen to the ground in less than 2 breaths of time, and blood covered the ground. Anu and the others were utterly stunned on the spot as if they'd been petrified. Xianxia opened his mouth as if he intended to say something. However, Yang Yi didn't give him the chance and flicked his sword lightly, causing Xianxia's body to instantly explode apart. Yang Yi waved his right hand, causing a strong gust of wind to blow forward and blast the flesh and blood away. After he finished doing that, Yang Yi turned around to gaze at Anu and the others as he said, "Why didn't you attack just now?" The killing intent in his eyes wasn't concealed at all, and it seemed like he would attack if their answer couldn't satisfy him. As soon as Yang Yi questioned them, Zhang Lu and the others gazed at Anu's group, and they locked onto their auras. So long as Anu and the others acted unusually in the slightest, then absolute destruction would be there to greet them. Anu and the others returned to their senses, and they were extremely astounded in their hearts. Moreover, cold sweat had gradually emerged from their foreheads while being stared at by Yang Yi and the others, and some comparatively weaker profounders amongst them had even started trembling. The strength Yang Yi and the others revealed just now was truly too terrifying. Over 50 profounders had been completely annihilated in just a few breaths of time, and they didn't even have the ability to resist. On the other hand, Yang Yi, their pavilion master, had actually instantly annihilated a second-rank spirit realm expert. My God, is this pavilion master an Exalt realm expert? But it wasn't the time for them to feel shocked now. When they saw the horrifyingly cold gaze Yang Yi had, they knew that they'd infuriated this pavilion master of theirs, and with the decisiveness and ruthlessness he revealed, he might really make all of them leave their lives here. So, when they thought up to this point, cold sweat flowed from their bodies. They didn't dare hesitate to kneel immediately and speak in unison. "We made a mistake. Pavilion Master. Please forgive us and allow us to make up for it with meritorious service. Just kill them." Meanwhile, Nanjing suddenly walked over to Yang Yi and said, "They lack both strength and loyalty. What else can fellows like these do besides waste your money? It's better to just kill all of them and foster those subordinates of yours with your full ability." The corners of their mouths twitched, and if it weren't because of Yang Yi, Anu and the others would even have the intent to kill Nanjing right now. Anu sneaked a glance at Yang Yi and noticed that Yang Ye's brows had knit together while he seemed to be tempted by the idea. "Shit!" Anu instantly exclaimed in her heart. and then she hurriedly said, "Pavilion Master, we're unlike Xianxia. He was recruited into the Assassin's Pavilion by Master, but we were personally fostered by Master. Pavilion Master has entirely no need to worry about our loyalty. We'll definitely pledge our eternal loyalty to Pavilion Master. I hope Pavilion Master can give us an opportunity to make up for our mistakes." Yang Yi phased silently at them for a long time. In the end, he didn't choose to kill them all. No matter what, they were personally fostered by Xianxia, so it would disappoint Xianxia if he were to kill them. Moreover, he really needed more forces right now, and these fellows were still quite useful to him. "Rise," said Yang Yi in an indifferent tone. Anu and the others instantly heaved sighs of relief, because no matter what, their lives were safe now. Anu snuck a peek at Zhang Lu and the others while she thought in his heart, "That's the mysterious force by the Pavilion Master's side, and they're actually so formidable. But why do these assassins seem like members of the League of Doom?" While Anu was puzzled in her heart, a set of black armor suddenly appeared in front of her. At the same time that she was stunned by this, she heard Yang Ye's voice. "This set of armor is called the Spectre set. It's made up of a total of 8 pieces, and every single one is a low-grade heaven-rank treasure. I won't elaborate on their effects and benefits. You can experience it for yourself." Yang Yi was still quite satisfied by her display. Moreover, her strength wasn't bad, and she actually addressed Xianxia as master. So, she was definitely a trusted subordinate of Xianxia's. Since it was like that, he would naturally not be stingy to her. The others behind Anu gazed at her with eyes filled with envy when they heard Yang Yi. Low-grade heaven-rank treasures, and 8 of them. Moreover, it was even a set. At the same time they felt envious. They were even more shocked because the Pavilion Master was actually so generous and had casually bestowed a set of heaven-rank treasures. When they thought up to here, all of them started to feel regretful. They regretted failing to put on a good display in front of Yang Yi. Otherwise, they wouldn't have no choice but to just watch helplessly right now. After he recovered from her shock, Anu hurriedly received the Spectre set, and then she knelt down on one knee in front of Yang Yi and said, "Thank you, Pavilion Master, for this bestowal." Yang Yi waved his hand and said, "Stand up and speak. I have a few questions for you." Anu hurriedly stood up while her expression was even more respectful than before. "Is everyone from the Assassin's Pavilion here?" asked Yang Yi. "No," Anu said. "The Assassin's Pavilion has a total of 207 members, and over 50 of them are profounders that Master recruited from the outside. The remaining profounders in the pavilion are our own. Pavilion Master killed 54 earlier. In other words, practically all the profounders who were recruited from the outside have been annihilated. All the remaining members are those that were personally selected and fostered by Master." Yang Yi continued, 50 more aren't here? They are part of the intelligence cell, and they specialize in gathering information and not assassination," said Anu. "So that's why." Yang Yi nodded and said, "Send someone back to the Southern Territory. Order the intelligence cell to gather everything related to the Flower Palace, including how many experts they have and the topography within the Flower Palace. In short, gather all information related to the Flower Palace and bring it to me. Besides that, ask Xie to investigate the true intentions of the Grand Qin Empire, the Origin School, the Flower Palace, and the other sects. The incidents in the Southern Territory were slightly strange, so he had to get to the bottom of it. Otherwise, if he were to enter the Southern Territory rashly, then it would probably destruction that awaited him. Even though his target was only the Flower Palace, he knew that the matter was far from being that simple. Because how could the Origin School and Ghost Sect possibly stand by idly if he were to attack the Flower Palace? In other words, he might not be facing just the Flower Palace this time, and he would have to face the forces of the Origin School and Ghost Sect as well. So, he had to make sufficient preparations. "Yes," Anu replied, and then she sent a spirit realm expert back to the Southern Territory. Right at this moment, the space in front of Yang Yi warped. Right when the expressions of everyone changed violently, a robust middle-aged man had appeared in front of Yang Yi. The middle-aged man sized up Yang Yi before he nodded lightly and said, "The second rank of the spirit realm? 7th level sword intent, a physical body that isn't weaker to a spirit rank dark beast. A few mysterious precious treasures as well. Not bad. Looks like you gained a lot during your trip to the ancient battlefield. It was none other than the Beast Emperor, the Imperial Palace of the Dark Beast Empire. There were only 2 people in the hall within the Imperial Palace. One was Xianxia and the other was the Beast Emperor. The Beast Emperor spoke slowly. If you want to save your mother, then you have to go against the Flower Palace. After all, it's absolutely impossible for the Flower Palace to compromise right now. Even though your natural endowment is extraordinary and your natural talent in the Sword Dao is superb, in the end, you're merely a spirit realm profounder that can be annihilated with a flick of the finger to them. In other words, you can only rescue your mother by force. Xianxia remained silent for a short while before he took a light breath while a cold glow flashed in his eyes. He said, "Then I'll rescue her by force." He was willing to make compromise with the Flower Palace if it meant he could rescue his mother. Unfortunately, they still didn't take him seriously, so trying to accomplish that was like asking for insult. Since it was like that, then he felt it was better to just annihilate the entire Flower Palace. The Beast Emperor shook his head and smiled. "Kid, it's easy for you to say, even though I agreed to lend you a hand, but that's just me and not the entire Dark Beast Empire. After all, even though I'm the Emperor of the Dark Beast Empire, many things can't be decided by just my will alone. Especially when dealing with the powers of the Southern Territory, because the slightest mistake would make a complete war erupt between the humans and dark beasts." Xianxia smiled and said, "I understand your worries, Beast Emperor, but what if I provide something that the Dark Beast Empire needs? So long as the benefits are sufficient, then I believe that no one within your empire will object, right?" "Oh!" A trace of interest arose in the Beast Emperor's eyes as he said, "Please do tell. I can change the limits of a dark beast's natural endowment and bloodline." Xianxia looked the Beast Emperor in the eye and spoke in a low voice. This was his true trump card, or it should be said that the Dark Beast Empire was his true trump card. If he wanted to gain the Dark Beast Empire's support, then he had to provide them with something the entire Dark Beast Empire was unable to refuse, and it just so happened that he had something like that. Sure enough, the smile on the Beast Emperor's face froze when he heard Xianxia. His eyes narrowed while he slowly clenched his right hand, and he stared at Xianxia for a short while before he said, "Is that really true?" If it was anyone else who'd spoken these words, he would have smacked that person to death on the spot. Why? Because it was like a dream. It wasn't impossible to change one's natural endowment. So long as one possessed certain precious treasures or was willing to pay a certain price, then slightly improving mediocre natural endowment was still possible. However, it was impossible to improve one's bloodline. The bloodline was something that one was born with, and it wasn't something that any external forces or treasures could change. Unless one broke through into the Saint Realm and utilized the energy of the heavens and the earth to alter one's own marrow and bloodline. Otherwise, it was absolutely impossible to improve the bloodline via external forces. The bloodline was of utmost importance to dark beasts, because the strength of their bloodlines directly affected their future accomplishments. Just like how some dark beasts could only remain at the king rank or spirit rank for their entire lifetimes. This was the effect of the restrictions of their bloodlines. On the other hand, some dark beasts were at the king rank or spirit rank at birth. This was the importance of their bloodline, and it was especially so for dark beasts. Yet now, Xianxia had said that he could allow dark beasts to overcome the restrictions of their bloodlines. If it was any other person who'd spoken these words to the Beast Emperor, then that person would be dead right now, but it was different because Xianxia was the one who'd spoken these words, so it merely made the Beast Emperor reveal a solemn expression. Of course, he had excitement and happiness on his face as well, because he felt that if someone in this world could really accomplish that, then besides the Saint Realm experts of legend, Xianxia was the only one, because he felt that the precious treasure of legend might be in Xianxia's possession. "Beast Emperor, do you think that I would play such a joke?" said Xianxia. When he saw the Beast Emperor's expression, he knew that he had a chance to secure the assistance of this colossus, the Dark Beast Empire. So long as he obtained the Dark Beast Empire's assistance, then he would be even more confident in his ability to go against the Flower Palace. The Beast Emperor pondered deeply for a long time before he said, "This is a matter that has great implications, so I must witness it in person. Otherwise, I dare not agree. It isn't just me. Even those old geezers in the clan wouldn't agree." Xianxia nodded and said, "Then I'll trouble Beast Emperor to bring gray and silver here. Right? They are in the Grand Myriad Mountains right now." 15 minutes later, over 10 old men had appeared within the hall. Of course, there were also gray and silver that were much larger than before. Xianxia immediately nodded with satisfaction when he saw them because these two fellows were actually at the spirit rank. As soon as they saw Xianxia, they instantly shrunk their figures and rose over to Xianxia's side, and then they rubbed their heads incessantly against Xianxia. Obviously, they really missed Xianxia as well. The gazes of the Beast Emperor and the old men had been constantly locked onto gray and silver, and it was like they wanted to devour these two wolves. A short while later, one of the old men took a deep breath and said, "They have actually really attained the spirit rank. These two fellows are merely ordinary wolves of lowly bloodlines. Even if they could attain the spirit realm, it would take over 100 years at least, and it would only be possible if they obtained an extraordinary fortuitous encounter. But how long has it been now? Moreover, I'm able to sense that their bloodlines seem to have mutated. No, it isn't just their blood. Even their marrow and meridians have mutated. In short, their future accomplishments are limitless." Another old man said, "Indeed, the current natural endowment and bloodlines possessed by these two little fellows aren't inferior to those cubs from the Skyhowl Demon Wolf clan. I never expected that there really is a method to alter natural endowment and bloodline in this world." Meanwhile, the old man and the other old men beside him gazed at Xianxia. All of their gazes glowed brilliantly as if they were perverts that had laid eyes upon a beauty, and it caused Xianxia to feel a chill run down his spine. "Kid, how many dark beasts can you alter at a single time?" asked one of the elders of the Dark Beast Empire. Xianxia pondered deeply for a moment and said, "I can do 10 at most in a month." Actually, he could do it without any limit, and all he had to do was place them in the space within the tiny vortex. However, he wasn't stupid, and it was always best to keep some tricks up his sleeve. 10 a month. The old man frowned and was clearly quite displeased by this answer. "Actually, it's a really huge amount," another elder said. "It amounts to 120 in a year, 120 geniuses in year, and it would be 1,200 in 10 years. If that continues, then a huge number of extraordinary experts would appear within our Dark Beast Empire within 100 years of time. At that time, wouldn't it be extremely easy for us to enter the demon territory?" The others nodded in agreement when they heard this elder. 100 years was only an instant to them. However, Xianxia's conditions was truly quite difficult. The Beast Emperor suddenly said, "Truthfully speaking, you've succeeded in moving us. However, acting against the Flower Palace is no trivial matter, and the slightest mistake will probably bring a calamity to my Dark Beast Empire. So, allow us to think about it." Even though the human sects were scheming and fighting against each other, and they even had a bad relationship with the Grand Qin Empire, but if the members of their Dark Beast Empire dared to enter the human world, then those various sects and the Grand Qin Empire would definitely unite against them. The Dark Beast Empire was extremely strong indeed, but it was still unable to refuse the entire human race in the Southern Territory. Xianxia smiled and said, "Actually, you don't have to worry about that at all, Senior, because I only need the high-level forces of the Dark Beast Empire. In other words, I need experts at the Spirit Realm and Exalt Realm. Moreover, we're only acting against the Flower Palace and not the Grand Qin Empire. I believe that the Grand Qin Empire would even be happy to see that happen." The Beast Emperor thought for a moment, and then he smiled as he said, "Indeed, the founding emperor burns with ambition, and he has had the intent to annihilate those 6 extraordinary sects of the Southern Territory for a very long time. If my Dark Beast Empire were to interfere in the battle between the sects in the Southern Territory, then the Sword Sect and Flower Palace would definitely be heavily injured even if they are able to avoid annihilation. That's undoubtedly a good thing to the Grand Qin Empire. So, Beast Emperor, you agree?" Yang Yi slowly clenched his fists while his heartbeat couldn't help but quicken. The Beast Emperor smiled and said, "My Dark Beast Emperor will dispatch 30 Exalt rank Dark Beasts, 100 Spirit rank Dark Beasts, and me. Are you satisfied?" The worry in Yang Ye's heart instantly eased up when he heard this, and he said, "Of course I am." The Beast Emperor nodded, and then he gazed at the other old men and said, "Do the elders have any objections?" One of the old men frowned as he pondered deeply, and then he said, "This matter carries great implications. We should give it more consideration. After all, a single mistake could cause our Dark Beast Emperor to suffer a heavy injury." "Elder Mo, those words are mistaken," a white-haired old man by the previous old man's side said. "There is no gain without pain. If we're able to create a group of extraordinary experts within our Dark Beast Empire within the next 100 years, then so what if we suffer a certain amount of losses or even cause the entire empire to suffer a heavy injury?" When he spoke up to hear, the white-haired old man gazed at the Beast Emperor and said, "I'm in favor of the Beast Emperor's decision." Yang Ye's eyes instantly lit up when he heard the old man, and he had a very good impression of the old man. He immediately walked over to the white-haired old man, and then he bowed slightly and said, "Thank you, Senior. Right. May I know if Senior's clan has any disciples with good natural talents?" The white-haired old man was slightly stunned, and then he understood Yang Yi. He immediately beamed with joy and said, "I do, of course I do. Haha, you're one awesome kid." The others quickly recovered from their shock when they witnessed this scene. "I'm agree with the Beast Emperor's decision. I agree. Agree." At this moment, they finally understood that they couldn't offend this human kid, because he could change the bloodline of the little fellows in their clans. When they figured this out, all of them started sending friendly signals to Yang Yi, and even that old man, Elder Mo, who was opposed to the decision earlier, had a flattering smile on his face and acted as if he was good friends with Yang Yi. The smile on the Beast Emperor's face grew even more brilliant when he witnessed this scene. The closer the relationship between the Dark Beast Empire and Yang Yi was, the happier he was. Even if Yang Yi didn't possess that precious treasure, with the natural talent and potential Yang Yi possessed, Yang Yi would definitely become an extraordinary expert in the future. Having an extraordinary human expert as a friend was a fortune to the Dark Beast Emperor. Moreover, Yang Yi had an extraordinarily close relationship with the mysterious spatial mink, so if his Dark Beast Empire were to move to the demon territory in the future, then they would probably have to rely on that spatial mink. In short, it was right to form a good relationship with Yang Yi. What fools! Those humans actually made a person who's so richly endowed by nature and possesses such extraordinary natural talent into their sworn enemy. Especially the Sword Sect, it actually abandoned Yang Yi. How laughable! But that's good as well. It's a loss for the humans, but it's fortune for my Dark Beast Empire. Yang Yi didn't return immediately to the Southern Territory upon obtaining the Dark Beast Empire's assistance, and he started concentrating on cultivation combat techniques instead. The reason he hadn't rushed back immediately was that the actions of the Grand Qin Empire and the 6 great powers of the Southern Territory were truly too strange. According to his evaluation, it wouldn't be too long before war would definitely erupt between these two parties. Yang Ye's plan was to seize the opportunity created by when the Flower Palace, Origin School, and the other sects were at war with the Grand Qin Empire to return to the Southern Territory. It was best if it was possible for him to destroy the Flower Palace, and even if he couldn't, he still wanted to strike a heavy blow to it. At this moment, he had the ability to go against the Flower Palace, and all he lacked was an opportunity. Yang Yi sat cross-legged in the cultivation room that the Beast Emperor had arranged for him, and Dragonbone floated silently in front of him. Besides Dragonbone, there were also the Nether Ghost Flame, Ninth Hell-Cold Gale, and Violet Cloud Lightning. There was no need to question the might of the 3 natural treasures, but Yang Yi was unable to utilize their might to its greatest potential, and it had always been something that he felt quite depressed about. If he wanted to bring forth their full might, then he had to fully familiarize himself with them like the sword spirit of the ancient sheath had told him earlier, and it was best if he could form a mental link with them. He could control the 3 of them now, but he was unable to form a mental link with them, and it was the exact reason why he was unable to fully utilize the might of these 3 natural treasures. Even though he couldn't form a mental link with them right now, he was on the verge of it. After all, they'd been nourished and nurtured within his tiny vortex all day and night, so a link more or less existed between him and the three natural treasures. Just like this very moment, he faintly sensed that the nether ghost flame seemed to be very annoyed by the violet cloud lightning, and if he wasn't suppressing it, then the nether ghost flame would have probably started fighting with the violet cloud lightning. That was also the thing that Xianxia felt the most depressed about, because the nether ghost flame could merge together with the ninth hell-cold gale, but it couldn't merge with the violet cloud lightning. So long as the violet cloud lightning was added in, then the nether ghost flame would immediately resist it, and this made Xianxia feel very helpless. Otherwise, how formidable would their combined strength be if they were to merge together? He would probably be able to kill an Exalt Realm expert even without utilizing the sword domain. It was very difficult to merge the three natural treasures together, but Xianxia didn't choose to give up. He was determined to merge them together and create a new technique. Xianxia opened his eyes slowly, and then he activated the sword domain because he only dared to play fearlessly with the three natural treasures while within his sword domain. If he were outside of it, then even he would probably die if they went berserk. The incident where he was heavily injured by the nether ghost flame that was attached to the sword formation was still fresh within his memories. He was like a sovereign within his sword domain, and even the three natural treasures wouldn't be able to harm him at all if they were to explode in front of him. The three natural treasures started to get closer to each other under Xianxia's control. However, the nether ghost flame and violet cloud lightning had exploded apart as soon as they came into contact. The sword domain was instantly filled with an expanse of lightning and flames. Moreover, the ninth hell-cold gale seemed to have been provoked as well, and it transformed into countless tiny tornadoes that appeared within the sword domain as well. Xianxia's eyelids twitched as he gazed at this scene. Fortunately, I utilized the sword domain, otherwise, just this alone would probably be horrible even if I have the mortal emperor armor and my physical defense to protect me. He was aware that the three natural treasures rejected each other, so he wasn't dispirited at all. He started to gradually split them up, and then he started to slowly make them merge again. The imperial palace of the Grand Qin Empire. At this moment, 23 middle-aged men were standing within the hall, and it was the founding ancestor who stood at the front of the hall. Every single one of the 23 middle-aged men were at the Exalt realm, and 9 of them were actually the 9 renowned marquises of the Grand Qin Empire. The 9 marquises controlled the 9 states and 1,000,000 troops. Besides that, every single one of them was an Exalt realm expert. The weakest amongst them was at the 5th rank of the Exalt realm, while the stronger was at the peak of the Exalt realm. On the other hand, the remaining 14 were figures who wielded great authority in the empire, like Li Si and Bai Qi. Even though they didn't command 1,000,000 strong like the 9 marquises, they commanded the most elite forces of the empire. For example, Bai Qi managed the Bloodbath Camp. Even though the Bloodbath Camp only possessed a few tens of thousands of members, the weakest amongst them was at the King Realm, while there were countless Spirit Realm experts amongst them. In short, the existences standing within the hall were those that wielded the most power in the Grand Qin Empire. Li Si, what do you think of the Origin School and the other sects trying to annihilate the Sword Sect? The founding emperor's gaze descended onto Li Si as he spoke indifferently. Li Si pondered deeply for a moment before he said, "I think that there's some sort of plot behind all of this. The Origin School and the others aren't idiots, yet they still dared to continue attacking the Sword Sect even when our Grand Qin Empire summoned all its elite forces back. I presume that they are unafraid and have something to rely on. It's even to the extent that I think that they are intentionally baiting us to attack them. But I'm puzzled, why would they act in that way? Could it be that they intend to destroy our Grand Qin Empire this time? Them?" Bai Qi grunted coldly and said, "Our empire possesses 1,000,000,000 troops. There are no less than 1,000,000 King Realm Profounders, a few tens of thousands of Spirit Realm Profounders, and over 100 Exalt Realm experts amongst these troops. Moreover, we have our emperor presiding over all of these forces. What would we have to fear even if the 6 sects were to join forces? We would still crush them." Li Si shook his head and said, "Those sects can't be underestimated, especially the Origin School. It has existed for over 10,000 years, and it possesses enormous resources and reserves. Moreover, their forces have infiltrated our empire as well. Numerous clans within our empire have sided with them, so if we really were to enter into war, then a rebellion would definitely arise within our empire itself. Isn't that for the best? We'll annihilate all of them at once, said Bai Qi in a cold voice. Li Si shook his head again and said, Brother Bai, your thoughts on it are too simple. After all, the connections of these clans are intertwined throughout our empire, and they possess numerous vassals. If we were to really enter into war with the Origin School and the other sects, then it's very likely that we'll have enemies from both our front and rear, and the slightest mistake would cause our empire to split apart. Bai Qi fell silent. He wasn't an idiot, and he just thought a little about it before he understood everything Li Si said. If they were to act against the six sects, then it was equivalent to acting against all the clans that were related to the six sects, and some of the disciples of these clans would definitely be holding positions in the empire. In short, once they acted against the sect, then a huge amount of problems would appear. All of them in the hall gazed at the founding emperor. They couldn't decide if the empire should attack the six sects, and only the founding emperor could make that decision. Li Si is right. Annihilating the sword sect isn't the true reason for their attack, and their true objective is to bait our empire to attack them. The founding emperor said, even though I don't know where they got the confidence to do that, it just happens to conform to my intentions. The six sects are a form of latent trouble in the end, so it's best to eliminate them. Only by eliminating the six sects would the southern territory truly belong to my Grand Qin Empire. Only then would my Grand Qin Empire have the opportunity to advance into the central territory. When he spoke up to hear, the founding emperor paused for a moment and smiled. The reason the Origin School and the other sects intend to annihilate my Grand Qin Empire is exactly the same. Only by bringing the resources of the entire southern territory together and taking control of all its geniuses would they possess the qualifications to go against the sects of the central territory. Otherwise, regardless of whether it's our empire or the six sects, we'll probably be unable to survive even if we pay the required price to enter the central territory. May I ask if we'll be waiting for them to annihilate the sword sect before we act, or shall take them by surprise and attack right now? Asked Li Si in a low voice. Since the founding emperor had decided, then his job wasn't to advise the founding ancestor against it, and it was to plan the attack. We'll wait for them to annihilate the sword sect. The founding ancestor grinned and said, even though the sword sect has fallen to decline and that fellow, Taoist Zue, overestimated his strength and perished while trying to overcome the heaven path, the sword sect still possesses the sect guarding grand formation that was set up by the Unfettered One himself. Supposedly, the Unfettered One placed a wisp of his soul into the grand formation. Haha! Even if it's only a wisp of his soul, the soul of a Saint Realm expert can probably threaten the lives of 5th-rank Monarch Realm experts. I really look forward to that. 3 days later, in the cultivation room in the Dark Beast Empire. At this moment, Xianxia's countenance was pale while sweat trickled down his entire body. The three natural treasures were intertwined together within the sword domain, and they were merely intertwined together yet hadn't truly merged together. Their elements and nature were completely different, so they would definitely reject each other, and it was already very difficult for him to succeed at making them intertwine together. With the current ability he possessed, it was still impossible for him to make them merge completely together in a short period of time. The three natural treasures were intertwined together and gradually took the form of a sword under Xianxia's control. The tip of the sword was formed from the violet cloud lightning, the blade was formed from the nether ghost flame instead, and the hilt was formed from the 9th hell cold gale. A crazy expression flickered within Xianxia's eyes as he gazed at the sword before him, which was formed from the three natural treasures. This was something he'd created from a moment of inspiration, and he'd merely just thought of giving it a try. However, he hadn't expected that he would actually succeed. Xiangxia stretched out his hand and grabbed the sword in his hand, and then the profound energy within his body surged into it. Xiangxia was pleasantly surprised to realize that they actually didn't reject his violet profound energy, and they allowed it to envelop them. The three natural treasures had merely joined together earlier, and they hadn't merged together. Yet now, The three natural treasures could be considered to have merged together to a certain extent when his violet profound energy enveloped them. Of course, the strength they possessed after they'd merged together was the most important, and it was completely useless if its strength was insufficient. Yang Yi didn't hesitate any longer. He attached his slaughter sword intent to the sword in his hand, and then a red glow arose around it. The violent energy contained within the sword caused Yang Ye's heart to thump quickly. Go! Yang Yi flicked with his wrist as he shouted. The sword formed from the three natural treasures transformed into a ray of light that shot forward violently. And it was extremely swift to the point even Yang Yi wasn't able to see it earlier as it directly pierced through the wall of the cultivation room that resided 300 m in front of him. Yang Yi hadn't noticed that a trace of a spatial rift had appeared everywhere the sword passed, and he just hadn't noticed it because the sword was too swift while the laws of the heavens and the earth had repaired the rifts right after the sword passed. The might of this attack was already capable of slashing through space. In other words, this strike was comparable to a high-grade heaven-rank combat technique. A few breaths of time after the sword had transformed into a ray of light and pierced through the wall, Yang Yi seemed to have thought of something, and he cursed in his heart. However, it was too late. Bang! An enormous bang that shook the heavens resounded and rumbled within the Dark Beast Empire. Countless experts of the Dark Beast Empire were astounded and flashed towards the Imperial Palace because Xianxia's cultivation room was within the Imperial Palace. The cultivation room was situated within the Imperial Palace of the Dark Beast Empire, and it was here the members of the Imperial family cultivated. The cultivation rooms occupied a huge area, and just a single one was over 3 kilometers wide. Of course, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that an area of 3 kilometers in all directions with Xianxia's cultivation room at the center had been transformed into ruins. Countless strands of flames, lightning, and cold gales raged through the surroundings and ceaselessly damaged it. It simply seemed like the end of the world had arrived. The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched incessantly when he witnessed this scene. Of course, he felt even more delighted and excited in his heart because its might was too terrifying. If he had this technique that day, then he probably wouldn't have to utilize the sword domain to annihilate that Exalt Realm expert from the Flower Palace. However, there was a slight flaw, and it was that it truly consumed a huge amount of profound energy. Just that attack from before had instantly exhausted all the profound energy within his body, and if his profound energy wasn't much more abundant than an ordinary spirit realm expert, then just that attack from before would have exhausted him to death. Even though it exhausted an enormous amount of profound energy, the exhaustion was worth it. But what should I call this sword that's formed from natural treasures? Yang Yi was quite troubled by this as he'd never been skilled at naming things. But the technique couldn't be without a name. It wasn't long before Yang Yi thought of one. Since it's formed from the 3 natural treasures, then I'll call it the Sword of Elements. The Sword of Elements. Haha. Not bad. I'll call it the Sword of Elements. Yang Yi was quite satisfied with this name. Of course, the main reason was that he couldn't think of a better name. It wasn't long before the Beast Emperor and the others arrived here. Yang Yi had kept the 3 natural treasures within the tiny vortex before the Beast Emperor and the others arrived. As he gazed at their unsightly expressions, Yang Yi knew that he was at fault, so he immediately smiled with embarrassment and said, I was trying out a combat technique and failed to control it for a moment, and then this happened. Haha. The corners of the mouths of those elders by the Beast Emperor's side twitched. Does this kid think that we're idiots? Trying out a combat technique? What combat technique would possess such might? It actually obliterated everything in an area of 3 kilometers. Could it be a high-grade heaven-rank technique? Even if it were, how could this kid be able to bring forth its might with the cultivation he possesses right now? Even though Yang Ye's status was lofty and these members of the Dark Beast Empire wouldn't offend him for such a trivial matter, it was the Imperial Palace of the Dark Beast Empire in the end. Yang Yi had really gone a bit too far by causing such a huge commotion here. One of the elders was just about to say something when Yang Yi withdrew the roots of a spirit herb, and he said, I know I'm at fault and caused trouble for the Dark Beast Empire, so I'm sorry. I'll take responsibility for the losses suffered here. Please these roots of a beast limit herb as the compensation. May I know if seniors are satisfied? He would naturally not compensate them with an actual beast limit herb. Even though he had a huge amount of them, but a single beast limit herb was sufficient in value to create a few dozen cultivation rooms like this one. When that elder who was just about to say something saw these roots, he immediately swallowed back the words he was about to berate Xianxia with, and then he gestured with his right hand, causing the roots to instantly fall into his grasp. He sized it up carefully for a while before he said with excitement, "It really is the roots of a beast limit herb. It really is one." When he spoke up to this point, the elder suddenly gazed at Xianxia and said, "Kid, do you have more of this thing?" Xianxia shrugged and said, "I don't. All of them were eaten by the little fellow. Only these roots remain because the little fellow discarded as they didn't taste nice." At this moment, he naturally had to make the little fellow take the blame. After all, he could just let the little fellow eat a few for real once she woke up. "Who's the little fellow?" The elder roared furiously, and he was extremely agitated. Eating it like that is truly a waste of God's given gifts. If it was combined with other spirit herbs, then a single beast limit herb could be refined into at least 10 medicinal pills. These 10 medicinal pills had the chance of allowing 10 dark beasts below the Exalt realm to directly advance in their cultivations. Yet now it had been eaten by a fellow called the Little Fellow, and that little fellow had even said that it didn't taste nice. At this moment, all the elders were filled with righteous indignation, and they wished for nothing more than to capture that little fellow and give that little fellow a good beating. Only the Beast Emperor's eyelids twitched when he heard Xianxia mention the little fellow because he naturally knew who the little fellow was, and that little fellow might really think nothing of the beast limit herb. The elders still intended to continue, but the Beast Emperor waved his hand and said, "Let's leave this matter at that. If you intend to cultivate in the future, then just choose one of the uninhabited mountains. Of course, if you have more roots of the beast limit herb, then you can continue cultivating in the Imperial Palace, and you can do as you please so long as you don't blast my Imperial residence apart. Of course, the precondition is that you have that many roots of the beast limit herb. Right? Kid, you can blast things up at will if you're able to provide the roots of beast limit herbs. You can blast apart any part of the Imperial Palace, no. You can blast apart any part of the Dark Beast Empire, and I'll deal with everything for you." It was the old man who took the roots of the beast limit herb from Xianxia that spoke these words. He was the enforcement elder of the Dark Beast Emperor, and his status was merely inferior to the Beast Emperor. At this moment, Xianxia seemed to have thought of something instead. He hadn't expected that the Dark Beast Empire was actually that poor to the point even the roots of a beast limit herb made them feel so excited. If they knew that he had at least a few hundred beast limit herbs, and he could even utilize the tiny vortex to grow more, then these fellows would probably disregard everything and rob him. He understood that a man's wealth would cause his ruin by arousing the green in others. After the Beast Emperor and the others left, only one person had stayed back, and it was a Nanjing. That combat technique from just now was very formidable, and Nanjing's eyes flickered with a glow of excitement as she spoke, and she seemed to desire a fight with Xianxia. Xianxia was about to speak when a wave of fluctuation arose from the space in front of him, and then a piece of information entered his mind. This transmission talisman contained the information related to the Southern Territory, and it had been sent over by Zhang Lu. A short while later, Xianxia's brows gradually knit together, and Nanjing asked, "Has something happened? The Sword Sect will probably be unable to persist any longer. I'm heading back to the Sword Sect." His voice carried a firm tone as he spoke these words. He didn't care about the Sword Sect's fate, but he had to save Xianxia no matter what, and he wouldn't hesitate to do so even if he had to expose the White Dragon in advance. She asked, "Should I come with you?" Xianxia shook his head because he intended to go alone this time. His main objective was to rescue Xianxia and not the Sword Sect, and he had a good chance of accomplishing that while relying on the White Dragon to conceal himself. After all, the target of the Origin School and Flower Palace was the Sword Sect and not Xianxia. And Nanjing nodded when she saw him shake his head, and Nanjing said, "Come back alive. I hope to experience that combat technique of yours from just now." She turned around and left once she finished speaking. Xianxia rubbed his nose, and then he shook his head and smiled. She really is infatuated with battle and the martial Tao. Yang Yi didn't notify anyone that he was returning to the southern territory. It took Yang Yi less than 4 hours of time to arrive at the sword sect while relying on the sword control technique that was enhanced by the 9th Hell Cold Gale. Of course, doing that exhausted a huge amount of his profound energy. However, would Yang Yi, who possessed extreme-grade energy stones, be worried about exhausting his profound energy? A wisp of a complicated expression flashed through his eyes when he saw the state that the sword sect was in. At this moment, besides Sky Peak, all the other 36 main peaks and the countless minor peaks had been transformed into level ground, while the corpses of disciples from the sword sect could be seen everywhere. The scene here was quite gloomy and bleak. Who could have imagined that one of the 6 great powers and the sacred grounds of cultivation for sword cultivators in the Southern Territory would have actually suffered such a fate? In the past, this place was where he, Yang Yi, cultivated as well. Even though he had few good memories here, he'd once taken this place to be his second home. Unfortunately, Yang Yi shook his head, got a set of the sword sect's uniform and wore it before he flashed towards Sky Peak. All along the way, Yang Yi didn't get entangled with the disciples from the 3 sects, and he raised his speed to its limits, so he quickly arrived at Sky Peak. At this moment, Sky Peak was covered in a mess, and all the other halls besides Sky Hall had been captured. At this moment, only less than 10,000 of the tens of thousands of disciples from the sword sect were standing outside Sky Hall, while the rest of the disciples had been annihilated. If they weren't relying on the sect guarding grand formation on Sky Peak, then the sword sect would have probably been complete massacred. Before long, Yang Yi found Xianxia amongst a group of disciples from the sword sect. She was still wearing a white dress, and she was still so cold, gorgeous, and otherworldly. The latter seemed to have sensed something and looked towards Yang Yi. Xianxia was stunned when she saw Yang Yi, and the sword in her hand almost dropped to the ground. Yang Yi grinned at her and was just about to walk over. Right at this moment, an explosion that sounded like a thunderclap resounded in the sky. Xianxia, would there be any need for it to come to this if all of you'd surrendered earlier? Yuan Tian stood proudly outside the grand formation as he gazed at the members of the sword sect, and he spoke indifferently. This grand formation isn't bad, but how long can all of you persist for? Once the grand formation is destroyed, your sect will probably be wiped off from the world. Xianxia, I'll give you one last chance. You can maintain a trace of the sword sect's inheritance if you surrender. If you refuse to surrender, then the sword sect will cease to exist on profounder continent. Surrender! Xianxia roared with laughter while his expression was slightly savage. He said, Yuan Tian, surrendering would probably be the moment my sword sect is truly destroyed, right? With the disposition you and Ghost King possess, would you even allow my sword sect to maintain its inheritance? Moreover, isn't it better for the disciples of my sword sect to just die than become your slaves? But my sword sect will make all of you pay with your blood before that happens. How stubborn! Yuan Tian grunted coldly. If it weren't for a certain reason, he would have destroyed the sword sect's grand formation a long time ago. How could he have possibly allowed them to persist until now? Hee. Yuan Tian, you should give up on making them surrender. Ghost King laughed coldly. Not to mention that they won't surrender. Would their surrender bring any benefits to us? Obtaining sword cultivators that haven't comprehended sword intent are just a waste of resources, and we would even have to take precautions against them at all times. It's truly not worth it. Alright, we've wasted enough time now, so let's join forces and destroy this formation. Alright? Yuan Tian thought for a moment before he said, Alright. As soon as he spoke, the two of them took a step forward. Yuan Tian flipped his palm before casually pressing it downward, and then a palm that was over 1 kilometer in length instantly appeared in midair and smashed down onto the golden energy barrier around Sky Peak. In an instant, the entire peak trembled violently while countless cracks started to appear on the golden energy barrier. Right at this moment, a red sphere of blood that was slightly inferior to the enormous palm arrived right after the palm, and it blasted onto the energy barrier which was covered in cracks. Bang! The entire sect guarding grand formation rumbled as it exploded into pieces. Yuan Tian and the others were delighted while sorrow arose in the hearts of members of the Sword Sect. But right at this moment, those pieces of the destroyed energy barrier had suddenly started to converge swiftly in midair, and it wasn't long before a slightly ethereal figure of an old man with a sword on his back appeared there. It's the soul of the founding ancestor. An expression of wild joy surged onto Su Mujia's face when he witnessed this scene, and he spoke with excitement. On the other hand, the expressions of Yuan Tian and the others changed and became extremely heavy. They hadn't imagined that a wisp of the Sword Sect's founding ancestor's soul was actually within the sect guarding Grand Formation. The Sword Sect's founding ancestor? Yang Yi was slightly dazed as he gazed at the ethereal old man in midair, who carried a sword on his back. Yang Yi had heard too many legends about the strongest expert in the entire Southern Territory and even the entire continent 10,000 years ago, and he hadn't expected that he would lay eyes on the Unfettered One himself. Even though it was only a wisp of the Unfettered One's soul. The first impression he had of the old man was domineeringness, unparalleled domineeringness. Even though the old man's figure was ethereal, he seemed like a mountain range as he stood there, and his entire body emanated a faint imposing aura that was suffocating. After the old man appeared here, there was a short moment of confusion in his eyes, but it wasn't long before his gaze cleared up. His gaze moved downward and swept through everyone outside Sky Hall before he shook his head and said, "I'd expected that the Sword Sect would fall into decline 10,000 years later, but I never expected it would be to such an extent." Su Mujia felt a wave of shame, and he was just about to speak when Yuan Tian suddenly spoke coldly. "You're the founding ancestor of the Sword Sect?" The old man glanced at Yuan Tian before he said, "A mere ant at the 5th rank of the monarch realm is actually on the verge of destroying my Sword Sect. How pitiful." Su Mujia felt even more ashamed when he heard this. "An ant?" Yuan Tian spoke with a ferocious expression. "Unfettered One, I admit that we would definitely not be a match for you if your main body was here. But you're just a wisp of soul right now. No matter how strong you are, how strong can a soul without a physical host be?" "Exactly." Meanwhile, Ghost King spoke in a cold voice. "Unfettered One, legends say that you were extremely domineering all those years ago and never wasted your breath on anyone. Presently, we intend to destroy your Sword Sect, so based on your past temper, you should have just raised your sword and struck us down. Why have you been wasting your breath after you made an appearance here? Could it be that you talk too much?" The Unfettered One suddenly interrupted Ghost King, and then he flicked with his finger, causing a strand of sword chi to shoot violently towards Ghost King. Ghost King's pupils constricted, and he was just about to resist. However, right at this moment, the strand of sword chi suddenly sped up explosively. It transformed into a ray of light that pierced through Ghost King's shoulder, and then his entire right arm flew off into the air. Hail the founding ancestor! The disciples of the Sword Sect were first stunned when they witnessed this scene, and then they cheered and bowed to the Unfettered One. Moreover, they revealed heartfelt smiles from surviving a calamity. There was nothing more delighting and joyful than seeing hope in a time of despair. At this moment, Yang Yi was in deep thought, because while that attack the Sword Sect's founding ancestor executed earlier seemed like a strand of sword chi, it really wasn't. After all, the Sword Sect's founding ancestor was in soul form right now, so it was utterly impossible to gather the energy within the heavens and the earth. If it was impossible to gather the energy within the heavens and the earth, then how was that attack executed? But if it wasn't a strand of sword chi, then how exactly was it executed? Could it be that besides the sword domain, sword intent, and enlightened sword heart, there's another method to cultivate in the sword Tao? The members of the Sword Sect were cheering while Yuan Tian and Yu Linglong had solemn expressions instead. But in next to no time, their expressions had eased up because the Unfettered One's soul have grown even more ethereal and translucent. Ghost King's expression was extremely ferocious after having his arm chopped off. Even though he was astounded by the strength of the Sword Sect's founding ancestor, he felt even more embarrassment and rage. Because a dignified master of a sect like him had actually almost died at the hands of a wisp of a soul from 10,000 years ago. Even though it was a wisp soul which belonged to the strongest expert in the last 10,000 years of the Southern Territory's history, it was still an extraordinary humiliation. Unfettered one, how many times can you execute such an attack without a physical host? Why don't you execute it one more time, and I won't resist it, all right? Ghost King roared madly with laughter. The unfettered one glanced coldly at Ghost King, and then his gaze swept towards the members of the Sword Sect outside Sky Hall and said, "Those who have comprehended the Sword Domain or Sword Soul, take a step forward." The disciples of the Sword Sect were stunned. They were utterly unaware of what the Sword Domain was. Su Muzha shook his head and laughed bitterly. Yang Yi was stunned amidst the crowd. Could it be that the Sword Sect's founding ancestor requires someone who has comprehended the Sword Domain to host his soul? Right, what's the Sword Soul? The unfettered one frowned when he saw no one step forward. And then he said, "Those who possess the enlightened Sword Heart, step forward." At this moment, the members of the Sword Sect understood their founding ancestors' intentions, and after they came to an understanding, all the disciples of the Sword Sect, including Su Muzha, felt extremely ashamed. Su Qingshi looked over at Yang Yi, and Yang Yi instantly felt quite troubled when he noticed it. He naturally knew what Su Qingshi meant, but truthfully speaking, he really didn't have like the Sword Sect at all and didn't want to lend it a hand. Moreover, he didn't dare to allow to host the unfettered one. After all, what would he do if the unfettered one noticed the tiny vortex? However, how could he possibly bear to refuse a request from her? Right when he was conflicted and troubled, the unfettered one's brows had knit together even more tightly in midair, and he said, "Those who have comprehended sword intent, step forward." Su Muzha sighed lightly. He went forward and bowed to the unfettered one before he said, "Founding ancestor, no one in the entire Sword Sect has comprehended the Sword Domain, the Sword Soul, the enlightened Sword Heart, or Sword Intent." The unfettered one shook his head lightly when he heard Su Muzha, and then he said, "I never expected that after I established this sect all those years ago, it would have actually fallen to such decline 10,000 years later." The reason he asked for those who had comprehended the Sword Domain, Sword Soul, Sword Intent, or enlightened Sword Heart to step forward was because only profounders who had comprehended these things were capable of temporarily hosting his soul. Only in that way would he be able to rely on that profounder's body to utilize his strength. After all, he was only a wisp of soul and not his main body. Ha ha! Right at this moment, Ghost King suddenly roared with laughter. He laughed for a short while before he said, "Su Muzha, haven't you made a mistake? How could you Sword Sect not possess someone like that? Doesn't that fellow Yang Yi possess the enlightened Sword Heart? Hasn't he comprehended Sword Intent? Oh right, he isn't a disciple of your Sword Sect anymore. If I'm not wrong, it was your Sword Sect that expelled him, right?" Ha ha ha! Yuan Tian shook his head as well and said, "You dug your own grave." The Sword Sect's founding ancestor was extremely terrifying, and he was still extraordinarily terrifying even if it was only a wisp of his soul. After all, he was once a Saint Realm expert and a sword cultivator. However, his ability was limited without a physical host, and they only had to pay a certain price before this wisp of the unfettered one's soul would be nothing to worry about. However, Yuan Tian had a question. "Unfettered one, if you tell us the origins of the Heaven Path and how to overcome it, then we can even spare the Sword Sect," said Yuan Tian in a low voice. Ghost King and Yu Linglong hesitated for a moment, and then they remained silent. Obviously, they tacitly approved of what Yuan Tian had said. However, it was absolutely impossible for them to spare the Sword Sect. How laughable! The unfettered one glanced at them with pity and said, "You actually dream to overcome the Heaven Path with the strength of an ant? You truly overestimate your ability. Even though I'm merely a wisp of soul, and I can only execute one last attack, but I guarantee that it'll kill one of you. So, which one of you'll be the first to give it a try?" Yuan Tian's eyes narrowed slightly before he said, "The Sword Sect will be wiped off from the Southern Territory today." The unfettered one remained silent while the space around him started to surge violently. Obviously, he was prepared to launch that final attack. Even though Yuan Tian had made such a threat, he didn't dare to be the first to attack. Because while the Unfettered One could only execute one last attack, he wasn't confident in his ability to withstand that attack. Even if he succeeded, he would probably suffer a heavy injury, and he couldn't afford to be heavily injured at such a time. After all, the Grand Qin Empire was eyeing his origin school from the shadows. Yuan Tian didn't dare be the first to attack, and both Ghost King and Yu Linglong were even more fearful. After all, they were slightly weaker than Yuan Tian. Since Yuan Tian wasn't confident in his ability to withstand it, then how could they possibly resist it? Moreover, they weren't stupid enough to sacrifice themselves and help the others at a time like this. For a time, both sides had fallen into a stalemate. On the ground below, Su Qingshe had walked over to Yang Ye's side. The two of them gazed at each other for a few breaths of time before Su Qingshe lowered her head slightly. She wanted for Yang Ye's help, but she knew that it was impossible for Yang Yi to help the Sword Sect with the character he had. After all, the Sword Sect had betrayed him first. So, if she were to ask this of Yang Yi, then countless cracks might instantly form between her and Yang Yi, because she was unable to imagine how she would face him if he refused her request. Actually, the problem was how both of them would face each other after that. However, how could she possibly just watch as the Sword Sect was annihilated just like that? After all, it was her home, and her loved ones were here as well. While Su Qingshe was conflicted and felt extremely helpless, Yang Yi shook his head and sighed before he grabbed her hand. After that, he pulled her into his arms and gave her a light peck on the forehead. At this moment, the gazes of countless in the surroundings had descended onto Yang Yi. After all, Su Qingshe was the daughter of the Sword Sect's master. But at this moment, the was being embraced by a man in front of everyone. Moreover, she didn't resist it at all. So, such a scene naturally drew the attention and aroused the curiosity of countless people. Yang Yi had left the Sword Sect for a few years now, and coupled with the fact that he'd disguised himself on purpose, so the disciples of the Sword Sect here weren't able to recognize him. Only some who Yang Yi had come into contact with in the past, like Qingxue and the others, felt that Yang Yi was slightly familiar. It wasn't long before someone recognized him. It's Yang Yi. He's Yang Yi. He's that Yang Yi who killed the Sword Emperor and has become the Sword Emperor now. It's him. It really is him. My God. He has actually returned to the Southern Territory and returned to the Sword Sect. A disciple of the Sword Sect who had once been an outer court disciple with Yang Yi pointed at him while roaring excitedly in a slight frenzy. It really is Yang Yi. It really is him. I recognize him. He's even our vice master of our sword school. I recognize him as well. He was even a labor disciple in the past. He's that fellow? Su Muzha gazed at Yang Yi while he muttered in a low voice. Right at this moment, the Unfettered One's gaze had descended onto Yang Yi. He was instantly stunned upon laying eyes on Yang Yi, and then his eyes lit up. After that, a slight smile appeared on his grim face. Yang Yi glanced at Su Qingshe, who laid within his arms, and grinned, and then condensed wings from his profound energy and flashed over to the Sword Sect's founding ancestor who was in midair. He didn't care about the fate of the Sword Sect's disciples, nor did he care about the fate of the Sword Sect. He only cared about Su Qingshe. It felt like needles were piercing his heart as he watched Su Qingshe in such a weak, struggling, and painful state. And it was exactly that scene which told him he was unable to steal his heart and cruelly refuse her. He couldn't bear to refuse her. In the end, he was unable to act mercilessly towards her. The Sword Domain, Peak 7th Level Slaughter Sword Intent, and the Enlightened Sword Heart. Good. Good. Very good. The Unfettered One gazed at Yang Yi while his smile grew even wider, and he said, You accomplish such a state at the mere age of 20. You're really not bad. It isn't inferior to my own accomplishments all those years ago. Luckily, the Sword Sect still has a trace of hope. Yang Yi was about to speak when Yuan Tian suddenly made a clawing motion towards Yang Yi from afar, and then an enormous claw pierced through space and arrived instantaneously before Yang Ye's head. Yang Ye's expression changed because this was utterly not something that he could resist. Fortunately, the Unfettered One had directly transformed into a ray of light that entered his body. In an instant, Xianxia's aura had immediately changed, and the shock and astonishment in his eyes had transformed into indifference and disregard. Yang Yi flicked with his finger, and then a strand of sword qi slashed horizontally and instantly slashed the enormous claw into half. Yuan Tian's expression changed when he witnessed this scene, and he was extremely regretful in his heart. I shouldn't have talked so much nonsense earlier and shouldn't have hesitated. I should have attacked immediately and destroyed this wisp of soul even if I had to pay a small price. What a waste. Right, why has Yang Yi appeared here? Could it be that all the disciples dispatched from the sect have been annihilated? Sword, come to me. Yang Yi took a step forward while he gestured with his right hand. After that, a ray of light shot into the sky from a mountain that was 5,000 kilometers away from the sword sect. The ray of light shot through space and instantly arrived in the sky above the sword sect, and then the light around is dispersed to reveal a sword that was covered in talisman markings. It's Void Flash, Su Muzha exclaimed from below. Void Flash was at the Dao rank, and it was crafted from spatial stones that were gathered from meteors. It possessed the shocking ability to pierce through space. It was a sword that belonged to the sword sect's founding ancestor all those years ago, and it had stayed by the Unfettered One's side for over 1,000 years until the Unfettered One encountered the Heavenly Inquisitor. This sword was ranked at the second position amongst the Dao artifacts of that time, and it was merely inferior to the Heavenly Inquisitor. The expressions of Yuan Tian and the others changed when they saw this sword as they'd recognized it. Retreat! Yuan Tian hesitated for a moment before his figure flashed towards the distance. It was impossible to annihilate the sword sect today, and staying here was utterly meaningless. Ghost King and Yu Linglong hesitated for a moment before they flashed towards the distance. With the strength they possessed, the three of them had a chance to annihilate Yang Yi, if they paid a certain price, but none of them was willing to pay that price. When the disciples of the three sects saw their sect masters retreating, they hurriedly retreated as well and didn't dare remain in the sword sect. Yuan Tian and the others were extremely swift, and only an instant had passed before they were 500 kilometers away. Right at this moment, Yang Yi suddenly laughed coldly and said, "Trying to flee?" After that, he swiftly stabbed Void Flash forward. A shocking scene occurred. Void Flash's blade instantly pierced through the space in front of Yang Yi, and then the pupils of Ghost King, who was already 500 kilometers away, had suddenly constricted, because the blade of a sword had suddenly appeared in front of him, and then it pierced through his chest. As a Monarch Realm expert, unless his soul was completely obliterated otherwise, he wouldn't truly die even if his physical body was destroyed. At this moment, even though his heart had been shattered from the stab it suffered, he hadn't really died. Of course, he was on the verge of it because the vitality within his body was vanishing at a speed that astounded him. "Blood slip!" Ghost King shouted as his figure exploded apart with a bang, and then it transformed into a rain of blood that covered the sky as it dispersed towards the distance. Sword Sect. I, Ghost King, will definitely return this 100-fold. In the sky above the Sword Sect, Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he immediately slashed towards the right. Yu Linglong, who was fleeing through space 500 kilometers away, had suddenly stopped while astonishment flashed through her eyes, because a ray of light had suddenly appeared in the space in front of her, and it was slashing down towards her at a speed she couldn't evade. Flower destruction! Yu Linglong shouted as her body suddenly exploded apart, and it transformed into countless petals that blasted against the ray of light. Bang! An enormous explosion rumbled and resounded in this expanse of space. A short while late, the ray of light dispersed while the countless petals slowly merged together in midair to gradually form Yu Linglong's figure. At this moment, her countenance was ghastly pale while her clothes were tattered, and the skin beneath her clothes were covered in scars created by a sword. Yu Linglong glanced resentfully towards the sword sect, and then she said, "Slaughter sword intent. It actually almost destroyed my foundation. How ruthless of you, Unfettered One. I, Yu Linglong, will remember this, and I'll definitely return it 100-fold in the future." As soon as she finished speaking, Yu Linglong immediately tore open the space in front of her, entered it, and vanished on the spot. In the sky above the sword sect, Yang Yi frowned and tightened the grip on his sword as he intended to attack once more. However, he hesitated for a moment before abandoning the idea in the end. He said in a low voice, "What a pity! If only this kid's cultivation was a little higher. This kid's body will definitely be unable to endure it if I were to utilize Void Flash again. What a pity!" As he finished speaking these words, the unfettered one's soul instantly left Yang Ye's body and floated in front of him. At this moment, the shock within Yang Ye's heart simply couldn't be described with words. Even though the unfettered one had taken control of his body just now, his consciousness was still wide awake. The two attacks the unfettered one executed earlier including at least 3 types of sword intent. Of course, most importantly, his method of attack had actually disregarded the barriers of space. It was simply like a simplified version of the little fellow's violet light. Right, this sword as well. Yang Yi lowered his head to gaze at the sword in his hand, and then he hesitated for a moment before he stabbed it lightly towards the area in front of him. Yang Yi watched in astonishment as the sword actually pierced into space, and then its tip and blade appeared over 30 m away. The hilt was still in his hand, but its tip and blade were over 30 m away. This sword. Yang Yi gulped down a mouthful of saliva as he twisted his wrist a little and placed the sword within the tiny vortex. From this moment onward, this sword was his, and no one could take it from him. The unfettered one seemed as if he hadn't noticed Yang Ye's actions, and he shot his gaze towards the members of the sword sect and said, "From this moment onward, the position of sect master in the sword sect will be held by this kid, and no one in the sword sect can disobey his orders. I'll definitely kill anyone who dares to disobey him. Do all of you have any objections?" The members of the sword sect on the ground below were stunned. Yang Yi has become the sect master? How old is he right now? Moreover, his strength seems to be a little insufficient. Yang Yi was stunned. The sword sect's master? What a joke! Not to mention whether they would be willing to accept it. Even I am unwilling to become the sect master of the sword sect. The current state of the sword sect was obvious. Even though it had repelled the origin school and the other sects, but who knew if those 3 sects would attack again later? Besides that, there was enmity between him and the sword sect. In short, it was very inadvisable for him to become the sword sect's master. The unfettered one paid no attention to the members of the sword sect on the ground below, and he gazed at Su Muzha instead. With his strength, he was naturally aware that Su Muzha was the strongest in the sword sect. Su Muzha's eyelids drooped while there was unwillingness in his eyes. He'd bitterly managed the sword sect for many years, so he was naturally quite unwilling to give it up so easily. However, he understood the founding ancestors' intentions. The sword sect needed someone with potential, and Yang Yi was undoubtedly such a person. Senior. Meanwhile, Yang Yi suddenly said, "My strength is weak, so how could I assume the responsibility of being the sect master of the sword sect? Moreover, I'm not a disciple of the sword sect. I merely stood forward this time because I couldn't bear to see someone whom I love being troubled and sad. Otherwise, to be perfectly honest, I would absolutely not step forward and cooperate with Senior." The unfettered one pondered deeply for a short while and said, "Never mind. I don't know exactly what sort of enmity exists between you and the sword sect, but regardless of that, you've done the sword sect a great kindness this time. I don't like owing others a favor, so I'll compensate you in a while." When he spoke up to hear, he gazed at Su Muzha and said, "You're too preoccupied by gains and losses, and you're calculative and concerned about too many things. This has caused your heart toward the sword to be bound. Even though you've relied on external forces to advance into the monarch realm, that's all you can achieve. Regardless of whether it's the sword Dao or cultivation, it's impossible for you to improve again unless you obtain a huge fortuitous encounter." Su Muzha's figure shook. A short while later, he suddenly roared with laughter, and he laughed for a while before he bowed towards the unfettered one and said, "Thank you, founding ancestor, for enlightening Muzha." As soon as he finished speaking, Su Muzha turned around to gaze at the disciples of the sword sect and said, "From this moment onward, Su Qingshe will hold the position of sect master. and the entire sect must fully support her. Actually, Su Muzha wanted to follow along with the Unfettered One's intentions and make Yang Yi the sect master. But it was clearly impossible because Yang Yi clearly refused and rejected the sword sect. However, he couldn't allow the relationship between Yang Yi and the sword sect to continuing growing worse. And the only method to resolve that was to allow Su Qingshe to be the sect master. Once Su Qingshe was the sect master, then could Yang Yi keep out of the sword sect's affairs or become hostile towards the sword sect? The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched. What a move! If she becomes the sword sect's master, then I'll probably really be unable to continue regarding it as an enemy. But if I think about it from another angle, if Su Qingshe is the sword sect's master, then isn't that equivalent to it being mine as well? Even though the sword sect is in a horrible state right now, it still possesses numerous experts in the end. Moreover, it has a huge amount of influence in the mortal world that in short, this isn't really a bad thing. Yes, the disciples of the sword sect didn't dare hesitate and hurriedly expressed their acknowledgement. The Unfettered One nodded lightly in midair because Su Muzha's decision was satisfactory to him. After that, the Unfettered One gazed at Yang Yi, and then he waved his right hand before he immediately vanished on the spot with Yang Yi. In Clear Breeze Gorge that was at the back of the sword sect, the Unfettered One floated in midair, yet his lower half had vanished and only his upper body remained. Moreover, his upper body was growing more and more faint and translucent. It was like he was dispersed at any time. I hope you can protect the sword sect on my behalf. The Unfettered One was very frank and didn't engage in any small talk. Yang Yi was stunned, and then he shook his head decisively. I'm only at the spirit realm. So what ability do I possess to protect the sword sect? Even though the sword sect had suffered heavy losses, a lean camel was still bigger than a horse. The sword sect still possessed numerous experts right now, and it even had a monarch realm expert. So, there was no need for him to protect the sword sect at all. Moreover, even if he had the ability, why should he protect the sword sect? After all, if it wasn't because of Su Qingshe, he would have even thought of helping Yuan Tian and the others annihilate the sword sect. He had an utterly terribly impression of the 6 great powers. The Unfettered One suddenly said, "Do you know what sort of sword technique I executed earlier while in the form of a soul? What technique was it?" Yang Ye's eyelids twitched. He was very curious about that attack, because that attack hadn't utilized even a trace of profound energy. But a strand of sword chi had actually been utilized while under the circumstances of not utilizing profound energy. This made Yang Yi feel both shocked and puzzled at the same time. The Unfettered One smiled and said, "It was a soul technique. To be precise, it was a sword soul technique. A sword soul technique formed from the essence, spirit, energy, soul energy, and mental energy. Moreover, it disregards the physical body. Unless the target of it possessed a dark treasure that specialized in defending against soul techniques. Otherwise, that technique can even disregard the defenses of high-grade heaven-rank dark treasures. Of course, the precondition is that your sword soul technique is sufficiently formidable." A sword soul technique. Isn't this similar to a Nanjing's triad mantra? Yang Yi was tempted. Just the ability to disregard physical defenses and dark treasures were sufficient to tempt him. Just think about it, if he were to utilize that shocking sword within the tiny vortex that he'd obtained earlier and executed this sword soul technique, then what would the effects be? If he was able to take his enemy by surprise, then he might even be able to instantly annihilate an exalt realm profounder. Yang Yi took a light breath of air and said, "Senior, what are your conditions?" The smile on the Unfettered One's face grew even brighter, and he said, "You've comprehended sword domain and the enlightened sword heart, and you even possess slaughter sword intent that's the sharpest and fiercest amongst sword intents. Your natural talent really isn't weaker to my own. Unfortunately, you haven't been able to comprehend the sword soul. Of course, perhaps this is asking too much of you. After all, I only comprehended the sword soul when I was at the peak of the exalt realm." The sword soul? Yang Yi was puzzled. What's that? Sword intent is equivalent to the spirit, energy, and essence of a sword, and it's capable of multiplying the strength of sword chi and sword techniques. The sword soul is equivalent to the soul of the sword, and it breathes life into the sword and sword techniques. Most importantly, once you've grasped the sword soul, you can utilize the spirit, energy, essence, and intent, sword intent, to make the four of them transform into a material state and form into another form of technique. The unfettered one spoke slowly. Xianxia laughed bitterly. So, there are actually so many different paths in the sword Dao. Looks like I still have a very long way on the path of the sword Dao. The unfettered one suddenly said, I can help you swiftly comprehend the sword soul. Xianxia didn't become delighted or excited. There was no free lunch in the world. Since the unfettered one had spoken these words, then he definitely had some sort of conditions. Sure enough, he continued, I only have a single condition. I hope that you can head to the extreme north of the Central Territory in the future. There's an underground palace there, and there's a person called Huan Bingyun within it. If she's still alive, then pass my apology to her. If she's dead, then just forget it. Xianxia was slightly surprised. He'd thought that the unfettered one would ask him to help the sword sect or ask him to join the sword sect, but he hadn't expected that the condition would actually be to help the unfettered one apologize. Xianxia pondered deeply for a moment before he said, I agree. He had no reason to refuse because it was just an apology, and it wasn't difficult at all. Moreover, since that person, Huan Bingyun, knew the sword sect's founding ancestor, then the chances of that person being alive was very tiny. The unfettered one nodded while his upper body had become practically translucent. Xianxia suddenly asked, Senior, are you still alive? After the unfettered one overcame the heaven path all those years ago, he'd vanished from the world, and his fate had always been a mystery. The unfettered one shook his head and said, I don't know. Don't put on such a surprised expression. After all, I'm only a wisp of soul. There are very few memories kept within this wisp of soul, and it doesn't have many memories of my main body. When he spoke up to hear, the unfettered one paused for a moment and said, Don't rashly try to overcome the heaven path. Even if you want to, you have to at least attain the 5th rank of the monarch realm, and your sword intent and sword domain have to be improved to a flawless state. Remember my words. Xianxia wanted to ask him why, but the unfettered one had waved his hand and said, I don't have much time left. I'll disperse the consciousness of this wisp of soul later, and then you must devour this wisp of my soul. This wisp of soul contains the method to comprehend the sword soul and some sword techniques I utilized all those years ago. Moreover, it contains some of my comprehensions and understandings of the sword Dao. It should be useful to you. As soon as he finished speaking and before Xianxia could even reply, the unfettered one's upper body suddenly shrunk and converged into a dot of light, and then it directly entered into the space between Xianxia's brows. Xianxia's face instantly warped because countless memories had surged into his mind, and the impact from it was extremely terrifying. Moreover, it struck directly at the mind. A long time passed before Xianxia's expression returned to normal. Besides numerous sword techniques of high rank and some comprehensions and experiences related to the sword Dao, this wisp of the unfettered one's soul contained some memories related to profounder continent. For example, there were memories related to the Nether God's Tomb in the 9th Hell, Martial God Mountain, Sword Emperor Mountain, and various other places. Of course, most importantly, it contained memories related to the sword soul. It turned out that the sword soul was just like sword intent. Both of them were in the form of intent, but the difference was that the sword soul was formed from the intent of the soul. To put it simply, one had to first grasp sword intent to grasp the sword soul because the cultivation of the soul required a soul cultivation technique and the assistance of sword intent. The soul cultivation technique was within the unfettered one's memories, and he possessed his own sword intent. So, all that remained was to find sufficient time to cultivate it. Suddenly, Xianxia turned around, and he noticed that Xianxia was standing not too far away. Xianxia walked over, and then he stretched out his hand and grabbed hers. The latter struggled a little, and then she just let him hold her hand when she noticed she wasn't able to struggle free from his grasp. As he gazed at the woman before him, Xianxia sighed with slight emotion in his heart. In the past, he'd had countless thoughts about embracing her in his arms, and he could finally do it for Realm now. Of course, there was some guilt in his heart towards her because he wasn't able to belong only to her in the end. even though it was common for one to have a few wives on profounder continent. But would anyone be willing to share their Tao companion with another? Moreover, she was even a woman who possessed an indisputable appearance and strength. However, all he could do was feel guilty right now because he was utterly unable to abandon Xiao Yushi or Su Qingshi. Yang Yi shook his head and discarded the distracting thoughts in his mind. Because it wasn't the time to think about it now. He had many things to do now. How long have you been standing here? Asked Yang Yi. Su Qingshi shook her head slightly and said, Thank you. Yang Yi knew why she was thanking him, and he immediately acted displeased and said, Qingshi, is there any need for that between us? I'm thanking you on the sword sect's behalf, said Su Qingshi. Yang Yi grinned and said, Then it's even more unnecessary. The reason I stood forward to cooperate with the Unfettered One was because I didn't want to see you in pain and sadness, and it wasn't because of the sword sect. If it weren't for you, it would be very likely that I would have even killed some disciples of the sword sect, in secret to vent my anger. After all, you know how the sword sect treated me all those years ago. Su Qingshi flipped her hand to grab his hand instead, and then she gazed at him as she said in a light voice, It won't happen again. I'll kill anyone in the sword sect who dares to think of harming you. Even though her voice was light, it carried an unquestionable tone. Yang Yi was slightly stunned, and then he joked, What if it's your father? Then I'll leave the sword sect with you. Su Qingshi took the initiative to stretch out her hand and place them around Yang Ye's waist, and then she buried her head in his chest as she said lightly, At the moment you stood forward earlier, I knew that I'm very important in your heart, because you were willing to change yourself and suffer for me. At that moment, I knew that I hadn't misjudged you. From today onward, you and our child are always the first in my heart, and I don't want to care about everything else anymore. Yang Yi was very moved. Suddenly, his eyes opened wide, and he pushed her away lightly and spoke with astonishment. Child? Qingshi, child? What do you mean? Su Qingshi blushed a little before she pulled Yang Ye's hand towards her and placed it on her stomach. Yang Yi was stunned on the spot when he touched it. Even if it was through her clothes, he was able to feel how smooth her stomach was. Of course, the most important part was that he felt that it had bulged up unusually. What did Yang Yi feel at this moment? Happiness and excitement filled every cell in his entire body. Ha ha! Yang Yi lifted her off her feet, and then he leaped up and flew into the sky on his sword. At this moment, Yang Yi was happy like a child. Su Qingshi revealed a rare smile on her face as well. A short while later, and after Yang Yi recovered from his excitement, he descended to the ground and held Su Qingshi's waist as he spoke happily. Qingshi, we actually conceived from just once. You're really amazing. Wait, I'm really amazing as well. Su Qingshi blushed again, and then she pinched Yang Ye's hands. She was quite unaccustomed to such jokes, but she wasn't against it in her heart. Yang Yi was about to say something. However, a wave of fluctuation arose in the space before him, and then a piece of information entered his mind. It was a transmission talisman. A short while later, the smile on Yang Ye's face had gradually vanished, and it was replaced by a solemn expression. What happened? Asked Su Qingshi in a light voice. The Grand Qin Empire has made its move. Yang Yi took a light breath of air. The opportunity he'd been waiting for had finally arrived. After the Origin School, Flower Palace, and Ghost Sect left in defeat, the Grand Qin Empire had suddenly led its army to attack all the other 5 sects besides the Sword Sect. Countless experts had swarmed out from the imperial capital, and they surged towards the 5 sects in a formidable array. At the same time, the founding emperor started to act against the clans that were related to the 6 great sects, and a few tens of thousands of clans had been annihilated overnight. The entire southern territory was in chaos. After he received the news that the Grand Qin Empire had attacked, Yang Yi immediately bid farewell to Su Qingshi and returned to the Grand Myriad Mountains. After that, he led over 40 Exalt Realm experts, 30 Exalt rank Dark Beasts, and over 100 Spirit rank Dark Beasts towards the Flower Palace. One day later, Yang Ye's group arrived near the Flower Palace. Yang Yi accepted the Beast Emperor's suggestion and didn't lead them to attack the Flower Palace directly. and he allowed the Beast Emperor to take him to Passionless Cliff. Because for some unknown reason, the forces of the Grand Qin Empire hadn't attacked the Flower Palace, and they'd set up camp in a city 500 kilometers away from the Flower Palace. At this moment, the Flower Palace could be said to be crowded, and every few meters of its territory had a disciple standing on guard there. At the same time, the grand formation of the Flower Palace had been activated, and even a mosquito couldn't enter the Flower Palace without being noticed. However, with the Beast Emperor leading him in, Xianxia didn't alarm anyone from the Flower Palace before he arrived at Passionless Cliff. "Go on down." The Beast Emperor gazed at the ghastly Passionless Cliff and said, "There seems to be a form of restriction set up in that place. The restriction wouldn't be able to endure my strength if I were to head down. In that way, it would definitely alarm the experts of the Flower Palace." Xianxia nodded and was just about to head down when the Beast Emperor said, "Remember to be careful once you get down there, because I've sensed 2 auras in this Flower Palace that are very obscure yet formidable. If they're alarmed, then even I would probably be unable to leave safely if they use the grand formation of the Flower Palace against me as well." Xianxia said, "I'll be careful." As soon as he finished speaking, Xianxia didn't hesitate to form wings from his profound energy and leap down. The Beast Emperor had a solemn expression as he watched Xianxia leap down Passionless Cliff, and he shot his gaze towards the center of the Flower Palace while he said in a low voice, "Why do I sense another faint aura besides them? But how could the Flower Palace possibly possess that many Monarch Realm experts? Could I be mistaken?" The Beast King frowned as he continued on this train of thought. After some time passed, Xianxia's feet finally touched the ground. A ghastly and cold expanse filled his surroundings while countless cold gales raged through the air. However, these cold winds weren't able to affect him at all. Conversely, he noticed that all the cold winds were actually absorbed by the 9th Hell Cold Gale within him as soon as he arrived here. Xianxia restrained the 9th Hell Cold Gale because even though it could absorb the cold winds here, he hadn't come here to do that. He sized up his surroundings before his figure flashed forward, and rows of pitch-black pillars quickly appeared within his field of vision. Many people were tied on those pillars. Some were alive while even more were died, and their corpses were rotting. In next to no time, Xianxia's gaze descended onto an enormous pillar on the round platform in the distance, and he instantly clenched his hands tightly when he saw the person tied to that pillar. When he walked over to the pillar, his face was already covered in tears without him realizing. At this moment, Feng Yu's face was ghastly pale while her eyes were closed tight, and her entire body was covered pitch-black iron chains that were densely covered in all sorts of symbols. Moreover, the cold winds in the surroundings were ceaselessly torturing her. Besides that, there were even countless bright red marks of the whip which seemed like numerous centipedes on her face. Xianxia's hand which he'd stretched towards Feng Yu had stopped in midair, and then he closed his eyes with pain. When he opened his eyes once more, his eyes were crimson red, and the slaughter sword intent he emanated caused the baleful cold winds in the surroundings to be instantly minced into nothingness. At this moment, Feng Yu suddenly opened her eyes slowly, and she was stunned open seeing Xianxia. After that, she said with slight uncertainty, "Year." Xianxia took a few steps forward and arrived before Feng Yu, and then he squeezed out a smile as he said, "It's me. Don't speak for now, mother. Allow me to get you out of here first." As he spoke, he flipped his palm and dragon bone appeared within it. Right when he was about to slash apart those chains that covered Feng Yu, she suddenly cried out, "Wait!" When she saw Xianxia stop, her eyes were filled with a bewildered expression as she continued. "These chains are crafted from earth-rank iron that are extremely hard, and they are even inscribed with talismans. You're utterly unable to slash them apart." Xianxia said, "Don't worry, mother. This sword in my hand was crafted from the bones of a dragon, and it's extremely hard. So, it'll cut through these chains like butter." As he spoke, Xianxia raised his sword and was about to strike. On the other hand, Feng Yu shook her head and stopped him once more. She said, "These iron chains can't be broken, because once they are, then it'll definitely alarm the Flower Palace. With your strength at the first heaven." When she spoke up to this point, Shock flashed through her eyes as Feng Yu said, "You're already at the spirit realm?" Yang Yi nodded and said, "Mother, I have the strength to rescue you now. These chains can't stop me. I advise you not to do that." It wasn't Feng Yu who spoke these words, and it was a woman who was 10 to the side. The woman was around 30 years of age, had a pale countenance, and seemed dispirited. Moreover, her eves were dim and lifeless, while even her voice was weak, as if she were on the verge of death. Yang Yi knew with a single glance that she wasn't far from death. When he thought up to this point, Yang Ye's pupils suddenly constricted before he swiftly turned around to gaze at his mother. Because his mother was in an almost similar state right now. But he was too excited just now and hadn't noticed until now. The woman who spoke earlier continued. "I don't know how you got in here, but let me tell you that these chains have a transmission talisman hidden within them. If you slash these iron chains apart, then the transmission talisman within them will be activated. And it'll only take a few breaths of time before the experts of the Flower Palace would rush over here. At that time, not to mention rescuing your mother, even you would die here." "She's right," Feng Yu said. Even if I die right now, I'd be able to go without much regrets after being able to see you now. If you're really thinking on my behalf, then leave quickly, and then take little Yao away from the southern territory and never return." Yang Yi shook his head and said, "Mother, don't you know me? Do you think it's possibly for me to leave you here? I've worked hard all my life so that our family could be together. So long as I'm able to rescue you from here, then we'll be able to be united. At that time, we can leave the southern territory, go somewhere else, and never return. All right?" The glow of tears flickered in Feng Yu's eyes as she said, "Silly child, the resources and reserves of the Flower Palace aren't something that you can go against. It'll still be in time if you leave now. You won't be able to leave if you're noticed by them." Yang Yi shook his head, didn't continue wasting his breath, and just swung his sword. Clang! The chains on Feng Yu's body were immediately slashed apart. At the same time, a strand of fluctuation flickered into appearance. However, it had just flickered when a strand of violet light flashed at an extremely swift speed, and it instantly minced the fluctuation into pieces. Without the chains to restrain her, Feng Yu's body instantly fell weakly to the ground. Yang Yi hurriedly moved forward to support her, and then he withdrew an extreme-grade energy stone and gave it to her so that she could absorb the energy within it. "How swift!" Meanwhile, the woman who spoke earlier exclaimed with shock. She hadn't expected that Yang Ye's sword would actually be so swift to the point he could even capture the traces of a transmission talisman and slash it into pieces. Yang Yi supported Feng Yu up as he walked towards the distance. However, he hadn't even taken 2 steps when a woman appeared not too far away from them, and then killing intent surged explosively within his eyes upon laying eyes on her. He knew this woman, or it should be said that he would never forget her. Because this woman was that very same woman who he'd seen torturing his mother through the space mirror. "Who are you? How dare you trespass into a forbidden area of my Flower Palace?" Lung Yu's eyes narrowed and were filled with killing intent. She'd originally intended to come here and vent her displeasure and gain some entertainment and joy from these criminals of the sect. After all, it was her only source of joy now. But she hadn't expected that an outsider would actually be within Passionless Cliff. And it was even a man. In next to no time, Lung Yu's gaze descended onto Feng Yu, and then her face fell as she said, "I never expected that someone would actually come to rescue you. Nor did I expect that it would be a young man. Could he be a lover of yours?" TSK. Feng Yu, your abilities of seduction are truly extraordinary." Lung Yu was naturally unafraid of Yang Yi because she'd immediately discerned that Yang Yi was only a spirit realm profounder, and she was already at the 8th rank of the spirit realm. Suddenly, Lung Yu's expression changed violently because Yang Yi had vanished on the spot, and he was already in front of her when his figure appeared again. Lung Yu was horrified. What speed is this? Right when she was about to dodge, a strand of invisible energy suddenly appeared around her, and then she instantly felt like a huge mountain had pressed down upon her, causing her to be unable to even catch her breath. Meanwhile, Yang Yi had directly grabbed her neck but didn't crush it. His eyes seemed like they had oceans of blood within them as he recalled how this woman whipped his mother that day, and his killing intent almost took material form. He said, "Don't worry, I won't kill you straight away. I'll return the pain you inflicted on my mother by 10-fold, 100-fold. Once you've been tortured to the extreme, I'll refine you into a sword servant, and then I'll sell you to the brothels of the Grand Qin Empire so you can be a whore for eternity." As soon as he finished speaking, Yang Yi disregarded the terror that filled Leng Yu's eyes as he issued a command in his heart, and the sword spirit took Leng Yu into the space within the ancient sheath and suppressed her there. "Yi, you." Feng Yu gazed at Yang Yi with slight shock. Leng Yu was a 7th-rank spirit realm expert, but she was captured by my son without even being able to resist. Is he really my son? Moreover, I should be holding a legendary extreme-grade energy stone in my hand, right? At this moment, Feng Yu felt like she didn't recognize Yang Yi anymore. At this moment, Yang Yi had no intention of explaining anything to Feng Yu as it wasn't the time for that. Right when he intended to take her away with him, a woman in palace clothes had suddenly appeared in front of him. Yang Ye's heart shook when he saw this woman, a monarch realm expert. Right at this moment the Beast Emperor appeared here, and he felt quite speechless at this moment. He knew that Yang Yi would definitely stop at nothing to save his mother upon descending down Passionless Cliff, and then it would definitely alarm the Flower Palace. As expected, Yang Yi really had alarmed the Flower Palace, and trouble had arrived now. "You're Yang Yi." The woman glanced at the Beast Emperor before her gaze descended onto Yang Yi. "Yes." Yang Yi looked straight back at her. No matter what, he was going to rescue his mother today. "Yi, don't be rude. This is mother's martial ancestor." Meanwhile, Feng Yu suddenly spoke softly to Yang Yi, and then she walked over to the woman and was about to bow to the woman. However, right at this moment, Yang Yi hurriedly stopped her and said, "Mother, what are you talking about? Is there any martial ancestor in this world who doesn't rescue one of their own? She isn't worthy of your respect." Feng Yu shook her head and said, "If it wasn't for martial ancestors' presence in the Flower Palace, then I would have been put to death by dismemberment on the day I was brought back to the Flower Palace, and then my soul would be caged. Moreover, it was Mother who disappointed the high hopes both martial ancestor and master had for Mother all those years ago. It was Mother who failed them, and they don't owe me anything." As soon as she finished speaking, Feng Yu had started to lower her body slowly. Right when she was about to kneel down, a gentle gust of wind blew on her and caused her body to be unable to drop down. "You're not a disciple of the Flower Palace anymore, and both I and your master have cut all ties with you on that day, so you don't have to kneel before me," said the woman. Feng Yu smiled bitterly and didn't insist. Meanwhile, the woman's gaze suddenly shot towards Yang Yi as she said, "It really is as the rumors said. You're an extraordinary genius in the sword Tao. You've actually attained the enlightened sword heart and comprehended slaughter sword intent at such a young age. The rarest of it all is that your foundation is so solid, and you even seized the first on the hidden dragon rankings for the Southern Territory. Feng Yu really gave birth to a good son." As soon as she finished speaking, the woman shook her head and gazed at the Beast Emperor before she said, "Beast Emperor, I don't understand why you would help him. Can you explain it to me?" The Beast Emperor shook his head and said, "Xianxia, it's all over. If this disciple of your disciple hadn't been tortured by the Flower Palace to such an extent, then perhaps I would tell you the reason and allow your Flower Palace to let bygone be bygones with him. Unfortunately, it's all over. It's really over. Xianxia, I can say with certainty that it'll take 100 years at most or even sooner. At that time, your Flower Palace will definitely vanish from this world." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, and she was just about to speak when Yang Yi suddenly gazed at the Beast Emperor and said, "Senior, what did you mean when you said everything is over?" The Beast Emperor pondered deeply for a moment, and then he shook his head and fell silent. Yang Yi intended to continue asking about it, but the woman suddenly said, "Go on and leave." Yang Yi was stunned. She actually intends to let us leave? What's the meaning of this? Right when Yang Yi was puzzled and bewildered, The woman glanced at Fengyu before her figure trembled slightly and vanished on the spot. Yang Yi gazed at the Beast Emperor with the hopes of obtaining an answer. "Year, let's go." Meanwhile, Fengyu suddenly pulled on Yang Ye's hand and said, "Mother misses little Yao. Take mother to see her. All right?" Yang Yi suppressed the questions and the bad premonition that arose in his heart just now, and then he nodded and said, "Come, let's go home." After the three of them left, three women in palace clothes appeared at Passionless Cliff. "Xianxia, you shouldn't have let them go." One of the women had a displeased expression on her face as she gazed at Xianxia. If Xianxia hadn't stopped them just now, then the three of them would have been entirely capable of annihilating Yang Yi and his mother even in the Beast Emperor's presence. "Qian Hui, what's the point of making a move against them now?" Xianxia said flatly. "Even though Fengyu is a disciple from my line of disciples, she violated the rules of the palace, so I've been already fulfilled my duty by keeping her alive until now. The reason I let her go isn't out of consideration for past ties, and it's instead because it isn't necessary for us to fight the Beast Emperor to the death right now." "Fight the Beast Emperor to the death? I don't think so." Qian Hui grunted coldly and said, "I don't know why the Beast Emperor was helping them, but I don't think we would fight us to the death for their sakes. I don't believe that Yang Yi is capable of producing something that would make the Beast Emperor risk everything and enter into war with our Flower Palace." Xianxia shook her head and said, "Since the Beast Emperor only intended to help Yang Yi rescue his mother, then we should just let him. Our Flower Palace is facing a great enemy right now, and we really can't make a single mistake. Moreover, it's just as the Beast Emperor said. It's meaningless even if they rescued her now." Qian Hui pondered deeply for a moment before a cold glow flashed through her eyes. She said, "But that fellow Yang Yi must die. His natural talent in the Sword Dao is comparable to the Sword Sect's founding ancestor, and he'll definitely become a formidable enemy of our Flower Palace if he's given the time to grow. He doesn't have a chance anymore." It was the woman who stood between Qian Hui and Xianxia who spoke these words. "Both of you aren't wrong. We shouldn't become enemies with the Beast Emperor right now, even if our Flower Palace isn't afraid of him. Of course, we can't just let this matter go as well. Once we annihilate the Grand Qin Empire, we'll head to the Grand Myriad Mountains to get even with him. As for that fellow Yang Yi, we'll let him life for some time. No matter how great his natural talent is, he's only at the spirit realm, and it's extremely easy to kill him." When they heard the woman, Qian Hui and Xianxia didn't voice their views again, and they just nodded to display their agreement. Obviously, this woman was the leader of the group. The woman suddenly said, "Who did the Grand Qin Empire send to lead the attack against our Flower Palace?" "Bai Qi and Li Si," Qian Hui said in a low voice. "They stepped into the monarch realm not long ago, and they both have Dao artifacts in their possession. They are very difficult to deal with." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly upon hearing this, and then a wisp of a solemn expression flashed within them. The two of them were naturally not unfamiliar to her. They were the true trusted subordinates of the founding emperor. Qian Hui grunted coldly and said, "The founding emperor really thinks highly of our Flower Palace by sending the two of them here. He's really mistaken if he thinks he can annihilate our Flower Palace. This time, our Flower Palace will definitely annihilate all those dogs of the Empire. I really look forward to seeing what sort of expression the founding ancestor would have when Li Si, Bai Qi, and all those troops die at our Flower Palace. We absolutely can't be careless." The woman said in a low voice, "I don't believe that the founding ancestor can't see through the intentions of the other four sects and us. Since he has chosen to attack after seeing through it, then it's clearly that he's confident in his ability just like we are. Even though I don't know where he gets his confidence from or what sort of trump card he possesses, it's best for us to be careful and not act carelessly." Qian Hui puckered her lips yet didn't retort. She just nodded unwillingly while she said in her heart, "Martial ancestor is getting more and more cowardly as she ages. What happened to Fairy Chen Huagu, who dared to kill the disciples of the Origin School and dared to talk back to Master?" With the Beast Emperor's help, Yang Yi didn't spend too much time to arrive at the Grand Qin Empire. Yang Yi heaved a sigh of relief when he didn't notice anyone from the Flower Palace pursuing them all along the way, and he'd decided that once he saw little Yao, he would take her along and leave the southern territory with their mother. Of course, he would bring Su Qingshi and Xianxia along as well. He really didn't want to participate in all of this chaos within the southern territory. Since the very beginning, all he'd wanted was to be united with his family. So, when he thought about the days he would have in the future, an unprecedented smile of happiness couldn't help but arise on his face. Right when he was about to enter the imperial capital, Feng Yu, who he carried on his back, spoke abruptly. "Year, how long more before we see Yao?" "Very soon," Yang Yi hurriedly said. "We've arrived at the imperial capital, and she's at the Talisman Masters Association in the imperial capital. My master, Lin Shan, is there with her, so no one in the imperial capital would dare to bully her." "There isn't enough time." Feng Yu shook her head and said, "Year, put me down. I have some things to tell you." Yang Yi stopped moving when he heard her, and then a strand of fear suddenly arose in his heart, and then it instantly suffused his entire body. Yang Yi suppressed the feeling in his heart and squeezed out a smile as he said, "Mother, what do you there isn't enough time? You're already fine. You're fine. We'll be able to see little Yao soon." As he spoke, Yang Ye's tears couldn't help but start flowing for some unknown reason. Feng Yu stretched out her hand to wipe off the tears on his face and said softly, "I've been keeping it from you, but Mother is actually dead." "What do you mean?" Yang Yi was in a slight state of confusion. "Mother, you're clearly alive and well. How could you possibly be dead?" "She really is dead." The Beast Emperor suddenly appeared here. "Senior, what do you mean?" Yang Ye's gaze was slightly hostile, and his voice carried an enraged tone. "There's no vitality within her body, and even her soul was condensed into form by force. Even though she seems like she's alive, it's only an illusion, because there's death energy within her. Once that secret technique that converged her soul disperses, then she'll become a true member of the dead. Moreover, her soul would disperse completely, and she'll be unable to enter the cycle of reincarnation." "Ha! The Flower Palace is truly cruel. Not only did they kill her, they even refused to give her the chance to be reincarnated," said the Beast Emperor. "Senior, you're really formidable," said Feng Yu. The Beast Emperor shook his head, and then stood silently at the side. Feng Yu stroked Yang Ye's cheek and said, "The Flower Palace adhered strictly to its rules, and they won't allow anyone that breaks the rules to live. Don't avenge me. At the very least, don't try to avenge me before you possess sufficient strength. Understand? I'm already very satisfied to have been able to see you. Even if my soul disperses, I'm still very satisfied." "No, no." Yang Yi shook his head while pain covered his face, and he said, "I won't let you die. I won't. I'll definitely be able to save you. Let's go see little Yao. Our family will be together. No one will be able to split us up again. No one." Yang Yi gazed at the Beast Emperor and spoke anxiously. "Senior, since you're aware of the Flower Palace's secret technique, then you should know how to remove it, right? Right?" The Beast Emperor shook his head and said, "It's useless even if I do, because her soul has dispersed and removing the secret technique will only make her soul vanish immediately. Of course, it's the same even if it isn't removed. There's death energy within her body. In other words, the world has taken her to be one of the dead. Can anyone in this world defy the heavens and change the fate of someone?